Hi, this is Gia Mancini,
I'm Louisa Silva.
I'm Doug Gardner.
And I'm Sarah Lubkin.
and we're the NASA Develop Team at Goddard Space Flight Center. We just want to thank you all for joining us today, and you can follow along with the slides that are posted on the event page, which is the same page that was linked for the webcast. So for the past 10 weeks, we've been working on a project focused on integrating NASA Earth observations with citizen science data in order to help combat vector-borne illness in Western Europe. So vector-borne illness accounts for 17% of infectious diseases and causes nearly 1 billion infections and 1 million deaths each year. Some common vectors include mosquitoes, ticks, and black flies. So mosquito-borne diseases are the most common and most prevalent, so things like Zika, malaria, dengue, and they're prevalent all throughout the world. Historically, they've mostly occurred in tropical regions of the world, but in recent years, they've spread to more temperate regions, so to places such as Western Europe. And then, as you all know, you're our project partners, so we're partnered with the Global Mosquito Alert Consortium and all of its constituents, and the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies.
So our partner's main concern is the spread of vector-borne disease. Rising temperatures are expanding mosquito population ranges and their breeding grounds. Using citizen science data in scientific research is a relatively new endeavor, but combining that data with NASA Earth observations will help our partners monitor mosquito populations and streamline data sets from multiple countries. It will also aid with public health preparations in the face of disease outbreaks. So our study period for this project was June 2016 to September 2017, and our study area was Western Europe. Specifically, we looked at the countries of Belgium, Italy, the Netherlands, and Spain, because those were the countries that supplied us with citizen science data. So citizen science data is research conducted by the general public. Using geo-capable mobile apps, people are able to answer questionnaires and submit them when exposed to mosquitoes or their breeding grounds. So some pros of citizen science data are the push for community involvement and the convenience, because anybody can access the apps from anywhere just by using their phone. There are some cons, however. The data can be unreliable. Some people sent in samples with their mosquito submissions, and not all of those samples actually ended up being mosquitoes. Another con is awareness. So not many people know that these apps even exist, and for that reason, some of the data is limited, especially because most of the observations occur after a media push.
So our objectives for this project were to combine citizen science data with NASA's remote sensing capabilities in order to help our partners at the Global Mosquito Alert Consortium to identify the key environmental factors that signal prime conditions for mosquitoes. With citizen science data, we can verify mosquito presence and utilize NASA Earth observations to determine the environmental conditions under which mosquitoes thrive. The methodology we created will continue to be used to collect data about mosquito activity as data from additional countries becomes available. We identified several environmental factors that could influence mosquito life cycles and population dispersion. These include elevation, land surface temperature, precipitation, vegetation, soil moisture, and humidity. In addition to these environmental factors, we also looked at land cover and population density. We used NASA Earth observations to collect environmental data in order to assess which factors influence mosquito population sites. We used AquaAIR's and Terra Modis instruments to measure land surface temperature and vegetation indices. We used GPM to collect precipitation data and SRTM to map out elevation.
The methodology for our project began with collecting two types of data, citizen science data and the environmental variable data. Using the geographic coordinates from the citizen science data, the team created a map showing how dense mosquito activity was for the study area. The team ran the data sets through the MaxEnt habitat suitability modeling software by layering the environmental variables along with the citizen science data collected. MaxEnt uses the data to determine which factors carry the most weight for influencing mosquito activity. With the citizen science data used for this project stemming from a handful of countries, the model will focus on those particular areas. A more complete model can be created as more citizen science data is collected and organized in future projects. The results of our habitat suitability model show the probability of mosquito activity occurrence on a scale from 0 to 1. Blue showing low mosquito likelihood and red showing high mosquito likelihood. This image is from our analysis from June of 2016. After analysis, it was determined that population density and elevation are the two most important variables correlated with mosquito activity. Population density will need to be normalized in future projects to account for larger data sets and data availability. The graph here shows the probability weight for different environmental variables on a month-to-month basis. The top two factors for the graph are population density in purple and elevation in orange. The remaining variables were consistently around or under 5% contribution to the model, except for land surface temperature and land cover. From the available research and analysis, the team concluded that mosquito activity is correlated with areas of high population density and low elevation. The model also showed trends indicating higher activity during the summer months. This can be in part contributed to the influx of data points from the summer for the citizen science data and should be carefully considered in the future. The team recommends that the Global Mosquito Alert Consortium create a standardized citizen science data collection questionnaire to make data collection and analysis easier.
So this develop project will continue on for a second term so that the products can be implemented in an interactive map on an open source platform such as Google Earth Engine. So we'd just like to thank all of our science advisors and project partners for making this project possible, and we're glad you were all able to listen in today.
So I have a couple of questions for the Develop team coming in from the internet. Thank you very much for that presentation. That was fabulous. It was really interesting to see those maps, and I'm glad that we have the slides as a reference as well. But as I'm going through the internet questions, is there anyone in the room that would like to kick off the discussion?
Hi, my name is Brianne Lowe, and I am part of the NASA NESIC team and also senior scientist for IGES in Arlington, Virginia. And thank you for a brilliant presentation. So exciting the work you're doing. This is very cutting edge, and we're just beginning to see the power of mosquito data in better understanding, I think, our environmental variables that we see in the satellite imagery, and how it's also these mosquito data can be used for reducing risk in mosquito-borne disease. So what really interested me was like your okay, this is a science thing, but I loved your last graph where you showed the predictability of the different variables. And I would like you to talk a little bit more about why you think certain variables have predictive power in using this model, and what you think your next steps might be. Thanks.
So I'll handle that since I was one that made the graph. So I feel like with elevation, that's probably the driving factor, even though population density was consistently higher than elevation with one or two exceptions for the months. But with population density, that's in part contributed to how small the data set was for the citizen science data. But also, it kind of goes along with if people are putting in the information for the citizen science data, it's probably going to be done in heavily populated areas. So as time goes on, as more data sets are added, and as we get more complete data, then I think you're going to see more that elevation is going to be the driving factor. I think for future data simulations, we're going to be running models where we're not accounting for population density, but instead just looking at elevation, land surface temperature, and land cover, I think are the three main factors for it. But it'll be exciting to see like what comes out from the data.
So just as a follow-up then, so when you ran the model, you did not, I don't know exactly what statistic you used, but you did not run the model without the population and without the elevation then?
So we ran with all the different
At once.
With the factors.
So multivariate.
Correct.
Regression.
It's because the main purpose of our project is to help develop a methodology, that blueprint,
Oh,
so
sure,
that way if we do come across issues like the population density, then we know what to do in the future and can easily run the model without those factors.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Dorian Janney, and I'm a Senior Education and Outreach Specialist for the Global Precipitation Measurement Mission out of Goddard Space Flight Center. And my question is more related to the education and outreach. I'm wondering, how were you able to attract and train the citizen scientists that you had that collected the data?
This is Ann Bowser from the Wilson Center. I can take a stab at answering this on behalf of the Global Mosquito Alert Consortium, who is the ultimate end user in the NASA Develop project. So these data came from 3 different citizen science projects that are currently active in Western Europe. And we hope to add in data from a 4th project in addition to the Globe Habitat Mosquito Mapper. And we have found through the Global Mosquito Alert Consortium that it's really critical to enable and support local projects that are working with their communities to collect data on mosquitoes that matter to them, both in terms of whether they're monitoring breeding grounds or adults or larvae or other proxies for adult vectors, and then also who they're engaging, what their specific protocol is, and then the specific local areas. And then the challenge becomes letting those people recruit, train, and manage their volunteers, and working with scientists such as the NASA Develop team to then combine the data that are collected on local levels into regional, national, and hopefully eventually a global scale data set. So I have a question now from Lynn Chambers. How do we know that population is actually a factor versus just having more data points from areas that are more populated?
So yeah, I think I addressed most of that. I think for future models, we're going to be looking at running MaxEnt without population density just to verify like what the environmental factors are going to be that drive the mosquito activity. It may very well be a factor, but from my estimation, looking at the data, I don't think it's a driving force.
Okay, we have a couple more hard-hitting questions coming in from project partners in the Netherlands. From Arnold, a critical remark related to elevation. We do not have any variation in elevation in the Netherlands. Everything is at or below sea level here, so that might have dominated the outcome. How did you determine these variables?
So we determine these variables initially by looking at various scientific literature and seeing what their other studies have taken a look at for mosquito habitats, whether that was soil moisture, humidity, land surface temperature, vegetation, elevation, I know I'm missing precipitation. Yeah, I think I said land cover, but so that's where we got our pool for the environmental factors, and so that's what led us to using the model that we ended up using.
Also, if you notice in the results map, the Netherlands and Belgium have a much higher likelihood of mosquito presence, and most likely it's due to their lower elevation.
But also due to us getting really good data from the Netherlands and Belgium as well. So,
Thank you, project partners. So then related to the modeling with MaxEnt, can you extrapolate to other countries and work on verification in the second follow-up term? Maybe that's a Victor question. Okay, I see some nods from the Develop.
This is Alison Theme, one of the project team members. Essentially, MaxEnt is a fairly robust model. So it's sort of like dump everything in the kitchen sink into it, and from there work backwards and figure out which of those environmental variables are actually impacting the model as it goes through an iterative process comparing the training sites or the observations of mosquitoes from the citizen science data to the various outputs of the model and going through it and trying to improve the model several thousand times. So each time we have done habitat suitability maps for a particular month, it's actually comparing quite a few different variables thousands of times. What was the question one more time? We're hoping to improve the model with more data. So right now we're limited to those 4 countries mentioned that currently have contributed data. As we have more inputs from other countries, those models are expected to improve.
Thank you. And then as a follow-up question, what can we expect from the next semester of the Develop partnership?
Sure. So we'll be handing this project off to another team, but they'll be using an interactive, like, open source platform like Google Earth Engine to make it more accessible to our project partners and to the public so that they could see the data that they're inputting sort of in real time.
I have one question that I'm going to stick in before I think maybe taking a final question from email. Have you thought about integrating public health data? What would this look like, and what sort of challenges would you expect to face?
Yeah, so we have thought about integrating public health data. It would just depend on how accessible the European health data is to us. And then, we could look at past outbreaks where they have occurred and what factors that scientists believe went into those outbreaks.
As far as running our model, it's actually fairly straightforward to incorporate more data points. And in statistics, you want your sample size to be as large as possible to be able to reflect the entire population as much as you can. And with MaxEnt, the first half of the equation of it, which is this, the occurrence data, the citizen science data, it uses what's called a CSV file. And I apologize for being a little technical here, but just adding on to that just is like adding a few extra rows onto an Excel spreadsheet. So being able to incorporate more countries or public health data or any sort of citizen science data that's incorporated will be easier down the road now that we've established this methodology for this kind of project.
And then I think a final question, does your team have any recommendations for the Global Mosquito Alert Consortium and the different project affiliates in terms of standardized collection as one of your recommendations?
Yeah, so we actually threw together a template of a standard collection app, let's say, that has which types of questions that you could ask so that we could have more numerical data, because numerical data is really going to drive the statistics in this analysis. So yeah, we have that template that we can give to you.
For us qualitative people, what is numerical data?
So numerical data is using mostly numbers. So for example, how many mosquitoes, how many times were you bitten, things like that, as opposed to location or.
Because with that data, if let's say you have one particular person submitting a report saying, oh, I experienced at least one mosquito, it's going to be different if we then have the number of mosquitoes, even if it's a ballpark estimate, because one person could say, oh, there's like 50 mosquitoes here compared to one mosquito, and that may influence the model, because then we can treat it as if there were like 50 occurrences of particular mosquitoes at one location, as opposed to saying, oh, there's one mosquito here, there's one mosquito here, because of the current layout that's currently for the citizen science data. The numbers will help with further statistical modeling and then be able to give us a more complete picture.
Excellent. For people who are listening in, Doug or anybody else on this team here, could you explain a little bit why we want to maybe perhaps move away from using categorical data in a way that our non-numerical friends can understand? Because I think this is really important.
Mm-hmm. So categorical data is, in my opinion, like a good first step as far as helping to make the blueprint, because it's a lot easier for people to pick from a drop-down menu in their phone app, and therefore they don't have to worry about counting an approximate or an exact number for mosquitoes. But that makes it harder for scientists to then be able to find like root causes, because numbers are pretty much the key to figuring out like how often something occurs or why something occurs. Because if you just have categorical data, then the scientists may have to make assumptions into their model to replace those numbers, but it's not going to be accurate. And once we have that quantitative or numerical data, then it's going to be much easier to apply those quantitative analysis, the statistical modeling, in order to come to the answer that everyone's looking for.
Thanks. I think that was a great explanation. It's the numbers guy who did that, so thanks.
Any other questions?
Just one last comment to how can we improve standardization between different citizen science apps. I know that one of the things the team discussed was actually what form the geographic data was coming in as. And it gets a little bit into the nitty-gritty of geography, but there are different formats for storing data, and we call those different projections or different datums. And it was interesting with this project was actually finding that most of the citizen science apps, we weren't able to find out that information. So making sure that that is standardized, and it very likely already is, but just making sure that that is, and going forward, that all of the apps are designed with a similar layout.
Any last thoughts from the develop team?
Just that this project was fun to work with, whether it was the people, the information, and just seeing the broad impact that this can have going forward. It was a lovely project to work on.
Well, we were extremely happy to have you as partners. Thank you very much for your hard work. There are some really beautiful things that came out of this project. I think the visualizations are really compelling. I'm excited to see what can be done in terms of interactivity, but it's fantastic to have a proof of concept and a general baseline for integrating these different data. I understand from some of the emails coming in that we have a couple additional complexities to consider, perhaps in the next round, but I think this particular project was an excellent first step at helping the Global Mosquito Alert Consortium advance our goals of integrating data across projects, and then also, of course, with NASA remote sensing data as well. So thank you very, very much to this. And okay, but I do have 2 additional questions. So I'm sorry, but they're from new project partners who haven't raised their voices yet. Okay. This is from Frederick from the Spanish data set, Mosquito Alert. In Spain, we provided the raw data, but in Pillar 1, we are already measuring numerical data. One important factor for them to know is that these numerical data must be out of biases and errors, so we need to model participants' propensity to generate a report first and know how many participants are in a given area for any given time for us to have non-biased numbers, and then we can get more accurate estimate of any numerical parameter that they would like to have. Does this make sense? I see some people nodding in the room. Okay. Thank you for that feedback. Okay, and then one more rapid question. What is your idea to validate the data?
So part of the MaxEnt model actually divides the observations into training and testing data. So part of the accuracy assessment is actually already housed within the model. So it takes, I believe, 90% of the data to train the model, and then that last 10% is used to compare against the model. So part of that is already integrated. We can further validate, I would assume, by projecting for future months and comparing that with the incoming data, but those months would be, I would assume, less accurate.
I think as we get more data, that will also help test the data we've already gotten because it is observation-based.
Well, we have now heard from all of the project partners running citizen science projects, so I think I can confidently close this session. I would also like to note that just as this is being webcast, we will have an archived video that will be posted to the same website later today. So you should feel free to watch that for a recap, or if you were unable to tune in for the entire handoff meeting. So thank you once again to the Develop team and to everyone who joined us virtually today.